Well, thank you very much, Frank. Fascinating presentation, and your conclusions in terms of the value of handling information, particularly found very interesting. We've got quite a few sessions the next few days that are looking at that, precisely that issue, the sort of digitization of trade and the information equation. But we're going to, I've got a few questions I'm going to ask. However, I'd like first of all to thank Frank again and APM Terminals, and we've got a little time. I'm going to open the floor for any questions. Would anybody like to make a comment or ask a question of Frank? I know it's early on in the conference, but you're allowed to speak, definitely. Well, I'm going to start then. Okay. So Frank, this is, I apologize, we've got one over here. If you could just state your name and company before you ask your question. Thank you.
My name is Philip de Grote, standing back and back. It was like music in my ears, what you always say, the right stuff. But I think you have the big advantage with the mass flux tool. You were starting from scratch. There was a lot of other ports in Europe. How are the other ports going to evaluate to what you put here on the presentation? I think this is a crucial one, because not everything is moving over the mass flux.
That's true. Of course, we would love that to happen. I think that's a relevant question. I'm not sure, but Rachel probably knows if there's a session on retrofitting existing terminals. That's certainly a topic that APM Terminals is looking into and vendors are interested in. But then I think we would only focus again on the hardware. And I think the examples that I gave, which are early stage, so we'll have to be modest, more on the supply chain collaboration. I don't think that is necessarily something that should be restricted to an automated facility at Maasvlakte 2. It's more a mindset for a terminal to acknowledge that there is something out there, even if there's no commercial contract with hinterland operators, that there is something that can be exchanged. The examples I gave was related to information. There may be other examples. It's a model that we also try to apply in APM Terminals in other locations, so adding value to that supply chain. Obviously, when you run an automated terminal, there's much more digital in your mindset. So probably you're geared up much more, let's say, for these newer ways of thinking and exchange of data information. On the other hand, I think this is also a possibility for other terminals without an automated setup. And that already exists, because it doesn't require a shift of your terminal layout. It just requires a shift of how you cooperate. Would be my first answer to that.
And just to follow up on that, indeed, and thank you, Frank, there's a session tomorrow afternoon in Tech Talk, which is there's a morning session on process automation and an afternoon session following on automation, also focused on robotics, but very much a topic there is the issue of brownfield terminals and how to take an existing running facility and introduce automation, which obviously is a whole other level of challenge, but has been identified to us as one that the industry will need to, as you've indicated, APM Terminals will need to be dealing with. And also in terms of the variable points on it being a culture shift, not necessarily a technology shift in terms of sharing data. That's coming up in various sessions as well in terms of carrier terminal data collaboration and the way that facilities such as yourself can link in with other parts of the chain, as maybe has not happened in the past. Any more questions? One here. Thank you very much.
James Frost, Marinova Consulting. I was intrigued to see the terminal operator in the console. Is that would he have been a member of the longshoring union prior to this new terminal opening? And do they tend to work the same hours as normal longshoremen?
Okay. Well, it's not called longshoremen in the Netherlands, but union members, yes. Obviously, we have high union membership in the Port of Rotterdam. So when I talked about transferring crane drivers from our existing terminal, we acknowledged that collective labor agreements were needed, and this was exactly one of the heavy debates that we had to stipulate to the unions. We accept this is a good tool, but it can't be just copy-paste. And actually, I think also the unions have realized what they put in to the front of employers in other industries, like good working conditions for office workers, is very relevant here. So it takes a little bit of time to adapt. So indeed, I don't know this particular person, but certainly a percentage of our remote operators are member of the union, and they all, let's say, are part of the collective labor agreements that we have. But indeed, if you compare ours with existing labor agreements in the Port of Rotterdam, there are a few changes that are relevant for us in terms of that we can harvest the potential of continuous mode of operation, because there's no, basically we have a perfect situation for hot seat change in this setup. On the other hand, of course, new regulations apply, like X hours of working behind the screen, whereas in a cabin that might be longer. So this is all being part of the process, and I think works fine for us now. So it can be done, also in combination with the dialogue with the unions. Yeah.
And we have one question just here. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Michael Cashman, Conchi Battaglia. Truck appointment system. It's evolving throughout the world. Last 20 years, more and more major groupings, areas are implementing these types of arrangements here. But in Rotterdam, this was a first, as I've understood. How quickly did you start to gain the trust and the win-win approach with the truck drivers? Because in Italy, for this thing, it's very difficult to break down. So I would just be interested, you know, okay, you said you used the word barter. So then you have to break it down. It takes a long time. But how quickly did you gain the trust to implement this?
Yeah, I understand the question, and a good question. I think I have to be honest, we had the privilege that we could use this opening moment as a kind of, I wouldn't call it a pressure tool, but nevertheless as a kind of wake-up call, something is changing. I think if you're in a running mode of operation where things may not work fine, but everybody's accustomed, that is a lot more difficult. So, but what we could have done, of course, is open the terminal because we have ample of capacity in the gate. So that's not a problem. We couldn't convince the truckers by pointing out that we have congestion. We were not even open. So it's basically reaching out, find a few willing coalition partners. It took us 1.5 years of talks, just talking, up and down, sometimes walking off the table again. So this is what it took. I think we were helped with the fact that it was partly theoretical and still we are ahead of the opening. I think that has helped, that we said, okay, when we open the terminal, this is a system that we want. And then basically the key thing that we had to bring to the table, of course, is there anything in exchange? It was very apparent for the truckers that there was a gain for us. So what do we give back? And that's a process where you need to build confidence. So it took us 1.5 years. And once in a while a little party for truckers to show them the terminal and give out a few good food when we do the, let's say, the introduction days. We're now in the early stage, of course, and committed to evaluate with those communities how things go and how we can improve further. Okay.
Any other questions? One towards the back. Thank you, Sam.
You mentioned about seamless integration, young professionals.
Sorry, I know it's Oscar, but could you just tell us who you are and your company?
Oscar Pernia, Navis. I am really lucky to work in APM project, but I would like to ask, you mentioned about seamless integration, young professional, and also user interfaces several times. How do you see your hiring strategy and also the control center organization in your terminal in comparison with other terminals?
So I think, Oscar, I know you as well very well, so I think you have to repeat it once again a little bit slower because I didn't really capture the question, sorry.
I am asking, how do you see the differences between your terminal and other terminals in reference to the control center organization and also the hiring strategy, because you mentioned seamless integration, young professionals, and user interfaces. So
I get it. Yeah, good. Yeah, you're asking the question because you visit our terminal and you know that we are in a learning mode, and I can be very open about that. I mean, what we have tried to do in Maasvlakte 2, also in the setup of the control room and the operational organization, is become quite radical in terms of no silos between IT equipment and operations. In practice, I think that we see that there is a benefit of bringing in people that have done similar jobs in the existing terminals that we have into Maasvlakte 2, because they know the business. At the same time, we see that the mixture is good as well, that we bring in people that come from, for instance, the chemical industry or power plants that we also see in Rotterdam. So that is, let's say, new way of thinking is being developed as a team. I can say we haven't found the golden bullet yet. This is not technology, so it's organizational learning. I do think that there is a need to continue what we've done in the project phase, bringing in people from, for instance, the automated baggage handling industry or the aerospace industry. We found out that it is maybe not easy, but at least possible to learn the basics of shipping and container terminals, but it's a lot more difficult when you might be an excellent operational guy or girl in a normal terminal, but then to grasp integrated systems and this collaboration between the various technical components. So I would say that for the future, again, bringing in young professionals that take integrated systems engineering approach into the container industry rather than convert existing operational people to the new way of working. That would be my prediction for the future.
Related to that, Frank, you mentioned in the presentation that simulation training for the remote crane, key crane drive is even more powerful than for those in a traditional environment. As you develop this, and I'm guessing other automated facilities around the world, what's your view on the training tools and training methodologies for the future? How are you going to keep your people trained?
Yeah. Well, I think there are examples already where we take simulation and especially gaming into this area. There's a company in the room as well that has developed together with ourselves and Rotterdam World Gateway, by the way, our neighbors in Rotterdam, a safety gaming tool where we try to expose people in a virtual environment to safety-related elements that may pop up in a terminal. I think there's a lot more out there. We haven't applied it, for instance, to the trucking community, but you could consider that as something that you could do. So I think in that area there's still a lot to come and to be developed, which I'm looking forward to.
That's one of the areas it's on the TOC agenda as well the next few days, is to look at some of those developments and start to talk about what could be to come. Are there any more questions? I'm going to just pose, switching tracks, but not that much. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is the energy side of all of this. As a zero emissions facility, I mean, what does that look like in practice, and how are you expecting this to actually pay off in a commercial way in the future?
Yeah, sustainability I didn't touch upon, but I think it was mentioned in the movie. And the reason for that, to one extent, I think we've mentioned it a couple of times. So it's known to the world, I assume. It was a one-off decision at the time that we took, when on top of all the electrification and automation, we said it's great if we convert the propulsion of the AGVs, which was a possibility that was offered by the vendor right in time, to battery-based. There is a business case. So the first element I think is very important. It may not apply to any port, but in Rotterdam, obviously, we have an enormous industry base, process industry base, so the energy, electricity infrastructure is top-notch. By the fact that we have a lot of various energy power consumers on the terminal because of all this robotic equipment, I think we have the possibility to manage our peak demand a lot more, which is one of the big differentiators in price. So that's an element, so we can play the market a lot better. In terms of zero emission, I think the great thing is to start off with, business-wise, that for the next 50 years I have no discussions whatsoever anymore with the environmental authorities. So I think we've done what we could do. We continue to be linked to whatever will occur in the world of energy generation. So actually I don't care. I do care, by the way, what the source is, because we source it from wind-powered energy sources. However, if ideas change and new technologies come to the front, we continue to be connected because we power waste. At the end of the day, what I do see, of course, is our employees are proud of the very fact that we run a zero-emission terminal. What I haven't come across yet is a shipper that says to me, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to change from that terminal to you. Because
of the zero emissions? Or?
But I think I'm actually convinced that will come. I mean, we've seen it in all manufacturing industries when we talk about child labor for clothes, something that we weren't very busy with a couple of years ago, and now everybody realizes that's an important element. So we're ready if that moment comes in logistics as well.
So just as we're kind of wrapping up here, I mean, going back to a couple of the other questions earlier, the terminal's been open just for a few months now. So, I mean, what's been the main sort of experience to date? What's the current status? And as you mentioned in your speech, and I heard about a bit yesterday as well, what's the outlook for what's coming next?
Yeah. Well, actually, we opened more or less on the soft side, our land side already late last year, which was partly outcome of how the project developed, but also a bit of philosophy because land side is important and it doesn't draw our attention anymore, and we can focus on the deep sea, which we are doing since February. We have 3 regular services these days calling the terminal. So we booked most of the days of the week, which is good for the organizational learning. We see basically productivity curve going up in a consistent way. We're not there yet. We're working hard to be ready to take on the first Asia-Europe service later in the year. That moment will come. I think the challenge basically is, on the one hand, obviously, technology, software, equipment, but I think a less easy part is, again, organizational learning. So despite all the effort that we put in training, the real job and the real learning only starts when the commercial cargo starts to arrive. So that keeps us busy, so it's not boring.
Just got a couple of points and questions to finish up, but before I ask my last questions, just a final opportunity for anybody from the floor who might want to comment. No. Well, let me just finish up here. Again, it's been mentioned in some of the earlier questions, and we're going to be talking about it in the next few days, but having got this facility up and running and part of a global terminal organization, what do you see now as the prospects for, full automation for some of these, at the high level of automation you're developing here to be developed in other parts of the world? I mean, what's the global prospect for this type of technology?
What we are currently already doing in APM Terminals is bringing automation, maybe not this scale of automation, to places of the world that have not seen it before. So we're developing a project in Mexico. In Europe, I have to say, of course, our project in Italy is progressing. And I think the moment will come where we will introduce automation gradually towards this scale, also beyond North America and Europe. And that's for the reason that I think in the past it was very obvious. It was a labor cost saving as the main driver for automation, but we've been through it. Health and safety on the workplace, sustainability, productivity, reliability are for us the key drivers to embrace automation. And so that will not be limited to the northern part of the world. That moment will come.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for a great opening to this year's conference, for sharing the project and the vision with us, and for some of the interesting points raised, not just you said about the technology on the terminal, but about the culture in terms of the relationships with other parts of the chain and what you can do with a change of mindset and a sharing of data. We'll look forward to further debates here and downstairs, but we will break for coffee, and first I'd like you to join me in thanking Frank in the usual fashion for kicking us off this year.
Thank you.